He probably set a new record for the most hated neighbor in Hidden Hills history when he quietly shut off the illegal water line that had been draining his private well, leaving one self-important neighbor's lawn to fry in the California heat. But really, what did they expect? They tapped into his water supply without permission. Now Sylvester Stallone was sitting on his patio in a weathered chair, sipping black coffee as the morning sun burned over the Santa Monica foothills, watching Doug Wexler, the self-styled king of luxury living, pace outside his front gate, phone in one hand, fury written all over his spray-tanned face. Stallone didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He'd already made his move. Before we get to the part where Doug's empire of entitlement starts to crumble, you might want to hang around, because it gets a whole lot messier. Stallone never planned on being the kind of guy who had to defend his own waterline. He'd had a lifetime of battling fictional enemies, opponents in the ring, soldiers in the jungle, corrupted cops. But this was something different, quieter, more absurd, and somehow more personal. After decades in the spotlight, he had chosen peace, a sprawling estate tucked into the wooded corners of Hidden Hills, California, a place with tall hedges, private gates, and just enough distance from the madness of Los Angeles. He'd bought the property in 2010, renovated it modestly, and lived simply. Eggs in the morning, walks with his old Labrador, Buck. Afternoon, reading under the oaks. Life wasn't about scripts anymore. It was about space, stillness, and staying out of people's way. Then came Doug. Doug Wexler arrived 2 years ago, loud and polished, with a real estate smile and a Lamborghini he revved like a chainsaw every morning. Luxury lifestyle consultant was what he called himself, though no one knew what that actually meant. Within weeks, Doug's property looked like a Vegas hotel. Manicured lawns in a drought zone, a new infinity pool, custom light shows along his garden path, and a giant marble lion statue out front. The HOA had gently reminded him of water restrictions. Doug laughed it off. "Come on," he'd said at a meeting. "The rich don't run dry." Stallone had heard it all from his porch. He hadn't responded. He just kept his peace, until the peace broke. It started with a soft change in water pressure, barely noticeable. But Stallone's well system, custom-built and tightly regulated, didn't fluctuate unless something was wrong. His contractor, Marco, who'd handled the well's installation 5 years earlier, came by to run diagnostics. Stallone said nothing, just pointed at the spot where the soil seemed disturbed near the eastern fence line. Marco crouched down, brushed away the gravel, and frowned. There it was, a fresh joint in the line. New PVC, poorly buried, snaking from the main well trench toward the neighboring property. "That's not your line," Marco said, straightening up. "Somebody spliced into it. It's drawing off your pressure." Stallone didn't speak. He just stared across the hedgerow. There were only 2 properties bordering that section of his estate. One was owned by an aging producer who spent most of his time in France. The other belonged to Doug. Stallone didn't go banging on doors. That wasn't his style. Instead, he called Anthony Forelli, a quiet friend from New York days, who now ran a private water systems compliance firm. Anthony didn't ask many questions. "Send me a map," he said. "I'll put someone on it." 2 days later, a woman named Leah showed up in a plain gray van. No logos, no uniform, just a tool belt, a clipboard, and a serious look. She spent 6 hours mapping the trench. By nightfall, she had the route traced. Doug's lawn, pool filtration system, and garden irrigation were all feeding off a hidden pipe routed directly from Stallone's well. "This isn't just a leaky neighbor hose," she explained. "It's a full-on tap job. He's stealing your water." Water theft. Not something you expected to deal with in a gated community full of six-figure fences and seven-figure egos. But here it was, illegal, unlicensed, and in direct violation of local drought conservation laws. In most counties, it would be civil, but California, deep in water crisis mode, treated this as a potential felony, especially when theft crossed into private well territory. Stallone nodded slowly, took off his sunglasses, and rubbed his eyes. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. What he felt was something colder, clean, like a clock starting to tick down. The next call he made wasn't to Doug. It was to the L.A. County Waterworks District. His assistant Grace submitted a request for a site inspection. Routine, legal, and under a real clause, Code 11.3b, which allowed the agency to review suspicious activity on private systems in high-usage zones. No drama, no warning, just procedure. 3 days later, 2 county agents in khaki shirts and utility belts rolled through Hidden Hills' front gate and parked outside Stallone's driveway. They ran a full inspection of his system first. Then, per protocol, they followed the visible trench route across the eastern fence. Within 20 minutes, they were standing on Doug's lush green lawn, looking at a junction box that hadn't been disclosed on any plans. One tapped his pen against the meter. "This shouldn't be here," he muttered. Doug came out fast, shirtless in gym shorts and full of bravado. "Hey, fellas, you boys from landscaping?" His grin faltered when he saw the county badges. "Oh, is there a problem?" The taller inspector opened his folder. "Mr. Wexler, we're investigating a possible unauthorized water tap linked to the property adjacent to yours. Are you aware of any modifications to your irrigation system?" Doug blinked. "Nah, man. I had a guy redo the lawn last fall. Maybe they tapped into an old line or something. I'll have to check with them." He smiled too much. He sweat too fast. The inspectors filed a citation on the spot and scheduled a formal review hearing for the following week. By evening, word had spread. In Hidden Hills, it didn't take much for gossip to travel. By morning, neighbors were whispering at the coffee shop. Doug's lawn started to lose pressure. Sprinklers didn't run. The lion statue looked thirsty. Stallone didn't speak about it. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He had done exactly what he always did, kept calm, stayed quiet, and let the system do the talking. The tap was off. The message was on. The next few days were oddly quiet. Doug's place, once the flashiest home on Willow Ridge, had gone still. No lawn crews, no blaring outdoor speakers, no half-dressed selfies from his balcony that usually made their way to Instagram. Stallone kept his usual pace. Morning walk with Buck, coffee on the porch, a call to Grace to review the week's schedule. But he noticed the change. There was something about silence that always came before desperation, especially from people who weren't used to being told no. On the 4th day, a luxury SUV crept up the gravel path and paused at Stallone's front gate. Doug stepped out alone. He didn't buzz the intercom. He just stood there, waiting. After a long pause, Stallone walked out himself, calm as ever, a straw hat shading his face. Doug smiled awkwardly and raised both hands like a man entering a poker game late. "Hey, Sly, can I call you Sly? I think we got off on the wrong foot." Stallone didn't respond. He just looked at the man, letting the silence sit heavy between them. Doug cleared his throat. Look, I didn't know there was a line there. The guy who did my yard? Total amateur. I'll deal with him." He laughed weakly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "But this whole thing, it's gotten kind of out of hand. County's talking about inspections. The HOA's on my back. Maybe we can just handle this neighbor to neighbor?" Stallone didn't blink. "You stole from me," he said, voice low but solid, "and then lied about it." Doug opened his mouth but said nothing. After a moment, Stallone continued, "There's nothing to handle. It's in the system now." And with that, he turned and walked back toward the house. Doug stood frozen for a beat, then climbed into his car and drove away, tires crunching with frustration. By the end of the week, official notices started hitting Doug's mailbox. The county had begun proceedings for a violation of water code regulations, citing unauthorized tapping into a private well during a declared drought emergency. The HOA followed up with their own letter, citing Doug for failure to comply with landscaping restrictions and improper modifications. It was like watching a man's facade crack in slow motion. His lawn browned under the sun. The lights in his fountain stayed dark. Neighbors walked their dogs a little slower past his home, stealing glances. Rumors moved fast in Hidden Hills. People said he'd been siphoning for months, maybe longer. Grace confirmed that local news had picked up the story, though they hadn't mentioned names. "We're watching it, don't worry," she said. "No one's tying you to anything." That was important to Stallone. He didn't want the spotlight back on him. He'd had enough of cameras and microphones. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect, something Doug never learned. Still, not everyone in the neighborhood understood the whole picture. A few of the newer residents began whispering that maybe Stallone had overreacted, that he could have handled it differently. That was until Leah returned, quietly and without fanfare, with new readings showing Doug's illegal tap had drained nearly 9,000 gallons from Stallone's private system in just over a month. "That's not landscaping," she said. "That's theft on a commercial level." She filed the report directly with county enforcement, and it became part of the case file. But Doug didn't back down. Not at first. He hired a lawyer, a flashy guy from Beverly Hills, who sent Stallone's team a cease and desist letter, filled with phrases like malicious obstruction and unjust interference with community standards. Grace laughed when she read it. "This guy thinks this is still a PR problem," she said. "He has no clue he's about to go under legal review for water fraud." Stallone didn't laugh. He just told her, "Let him talk. I'll wait." He had patience that came from years in the ring, years in the business. The kind of patience that knew how to let people destroy themselves. That destruction came faster than expected. A hearing was scheduled by the County Resource Management Office, and Doug was required to attend. His attorney tried to delay it, citing procedural misunderstandings, but the request was denied. Stallone didn't attend. He didn't need to. Leah submitted the footage, Marco provided the installation maps, and the inspectors testified about the illegal splice. Doug tried to argue it was all a mistake, that the contractor had acted without authorization. But then came the paperwork, permits filed for a supplemental irrigation system using an existing nearby source. The form had Doug's e-signature. His defense evaporated. The county levied a fine of $35,000 for unauthorized water use and damage to private infrastructure, plus a formal order to disconnect and remediate the line. Doug was livid. He tried to appeal. He tried to threaten counter lawsuits. but no one listened anymore. He'd lost the benefit of the doubt. And then, like every house of cards built too high on ego, Doug's carefully curated image started to collapse. Neighbors began sharing stories, little things once ignored. The gardener he'd fired for talking back. The time he shouted at the mail carrier for walking too slow. The dog he yelled at for barking past his gate. Piece by piece, his status as the neighborhood's rising star disintegrated. The final blow came not from a lawyer, not from Stallone, but from the HOA itself. At a monthly board meeting, they voted unanimously to suspend Doug's membership privileges, citing repeated violations and bringing negative attention to the community. It was the suburban equivalent of exile. No more hosting pool parties, no more block-wide barbecues, no more HOA-sponsored wine tastings. Doug was alone, disgraced, and boiling in the sun while his once perfect lawn turned to dust. Stallone never mentioned him again. When asked by a friend during an early morning walk how it all played out, he just smiled and said, "He'll be fine. He learned something." Then he tossed a tennis ball for Buck and let the matter drift away like so many stories in this town do, slowly, quietly, and with finality. The summer dragged on, relentless, with temperatures cresting triple digits nearly every day. While most of Hidden Hills braced for rolling blackouts and stricter drought mandates, Stallone's corner of the community remained steady, shaded by old oaks and fed by the reliable pulse of his own well, now secured and monitored like a military compound. After the county ruling, he had quietly invested in new piping, additional sensors, and a reinforced barrier where the illegal tap had once been. Marco's crew had done the work discreetly, avoiding attention, but the message was unmistakable. This water was protected. There were no more talks from Doug's side. In fact, Doug had gone nearly invisible. The Escalade was rarely seen. Deliveries were sparse. The Instagram posts stopped. Stallone heard from Grace that Doug had listed his home off-market, hoping to move quietly before the gossip reached too far outside the gates. "He'll get less than he paid," Grace noted. "Reputation's poison in these neighborhoods. People pay for calm, not chaos." Stallone just nodded. That was the thing about places like this. The fences were tall, but news still slipped through like sunlight. Recognizing his diligent stewardship of community resources and cooperative attitude in maintaining Hidden Hills' standard of excellence. It was as close to contrition as they would get. He left it unopened on the kitchen counter for 3 days before tossing it in a drawer. He hadn't done it for credit. He'd done it because it was right. Doug had crossed a line, and in doing so, reminded everyone that even in gated luxury, respect was non-negotiable. One evening, just after sunset painted the sky in bruised purples and fading reds, Stallone sat out back with Buck resting at his feet and a glass of bourbon in hand. The cicadas buzzed low in the trees. From the far side of the hill, soft footsteps approached, hesitant. He didn't look up right away, but he knew who it was. Mike Talbert, the head of the HOA, dressed in his usual khakis and a sweat-darkened polo, carrying a manila folder. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Stallone gestured to the bench beside him. Mike sat with a grunt, wiping his brow. "Listen, I wanted to say something," he began, fumbling a little. "Back when this started, some of us, well, we didn't know the whole story. Doug's a loud guy, yeah, but he made it sound like you were cutting off the community's water just to make a point. It took us a while to realize he was the one cheating the system." Stallone didn't respond. Mike shifted uncomfortably, then opened the folder, We're drafting a new policy, clearer rules on resource use, emergency protocols, penalties for violations. The board wants to name it the Stallone Amendment." At that, Stallone chuckled, a short, dry sound. "I don't need my name on anything," he said. "Just make sure the next guy who thinks he's smarter than the law gets a quicker answer." Mike nodded, folded the folder shut, and stood. "Fair enough," he said. "But you should know. You reminded folks that not everything's for sale. That still means something around here." As September rolled in, cooler nights returned, and with them came a different rhythm to the ranch. Grace started bringing her nieces on weekends to help tend the vegetable beds Stallone had revived out back. Marco's team installed a small rain catchment system and drip irrigation lines, not just to save water, but to keep things grounded in purpose. What had started as a response to violation was turning into something better, a return to care, to balance. A local elementary school reached out asking if they could send students on a tour to learn about conservation. Stallone surprised everyone by saying yes. "Bring boots," he told the teacher. "It's still a ranch." Word of the incident eventually traveled outside Hidden Hills. A regional news blog did a write-up titled "Hollywood Icon Handles Water Dispute with Quiet Grit." It ran well with older readers, earned Stallone a few nods at the post office and coffee shop. No paparazzi came, not anymore, but the piece sparked a handful of editorials on private wells, drought responsibility, and modern entitlement. Grace printed one and left it on the counter with a note. "You started something, even if you didn't mean to." Then one morning in early October, a letter arrived from the County Water Commission, inviting Stallone to join a task force focused on community-level conservation and responsible private sourcing. He didn't answer right away. It wasn't that he didn't care, he did, but he'd spent too many years on stages, under lights giving answers to rooms full of people who didn't always want the truth. This was different. This was his home. Eventually, he agreed to attend a meeting, quietly, without fanfare. He sat at the end of the table, listened more than he spoke, and when the talk veered toward regulation and enforcement, he said simply, "You can't punish folks into caring. You have to show them the value. Start there." The weeks that followed brought something else, too. Neighbors offering to help. One offered extra fencing material. Another dropped off heirloom seeds for the garden. A retired school teacher brought him a book on soil regeneration, annotated with sticky notes. These weren't grand gestures, but they mattered. They were signs that what had once been suspicion and gossip was turning into quiet respect. By Thanksgiving, Doug was gone. The house sold in a quiet deal to a semi-retired couple from Oregon who asked about installing solar and native plants on day one. The lion statue disappeared. The grass was pulled out, and just like that, the wound healed. No more whispers, no more side glances, just the hum of a neighborhood returning to its rhythm. By mid-August, the HOA sent Stallone a formal thank you letter. Not an apology, those rarely came, but a carefully worded note. Stallone didn't mark the moment with a celebration. He didn't need to. But he did take Buck for a long walk past the old property, nodded once at the clean slope where the illegal tap had been removed, and felt something settle in his chest. Not victory, not vindication, just clarity. It was never about revenge. It was about remembering what mattered and making sure the water stayed clean, not just the kind you drank, but the kind that ran through a community when no one was watching. By December, The HOA invited him to light the first tree at the winter gathering. He declined, but he sent a note. Let the kids do it. They've got more future in them. And when the lights went on that night, reflecting off the windows and soft snow, Stallone stood at his kitchen window, mug in hand, Buck asleep at his feet, and watched the neighborhood shine. Not because it had won anything, but because it had remembered who it was.